Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray. Welcome to your weekly 10-minute fix of ancient history topics where I attempt to answer a question from one of our viewers, patrons, or just someone general randomly running into you and saying, hey, what about this question? So today's question is from someone named Nathan, and he says he's been watching for a couple of years, one of his favorite channels. Thank you, Nathan. Is there an equivalent to the volley fire that the British used to gain them an empire in ancient or pre-gunpowder war? Now, this is a bit of a rabbit hole for me, so strap yourselves in. The basic question seems to be no, that in the ancient world there isn't volley fire. When we get mentions of archers in the Iliad and in later warfare, we tend to get individual arrows doing a role and individual sniping. If you think of the archers in the Iliad, for instance, they're single shot achievements. You then move on into warfare such as the Persian Wars, where the most famous comment about the Persian Wars, of course, is that the Persian arrows will blot out the sun, which is Dionysius in Book 7 of Herodotus, basically being told by the men of Trachis that when the barbarians discharged their arrows, they obscured the light of the sun by the multitude of arrows. So great was the number of their host. Now, that is not a volley, which is generally how it's seen. And when you look at archery fire in ancient or movies about ancient warfare, there's a flight of arrows as like a band, followed by another flight of arrows. There's nothing in the sources to say that organization of ancient archery even existed. Now, obviously, with archery, you can fire a multitude of arrows in a very short period of time. Ammunition is going to be an issue. We have from Xenophon's Anabasis the idea that the Greek archers could fire the arrows of the men firing at them back at them, but there's some other issues there that the arrows actually didn't fit. They were bigger, and then there's bows that they had to use with their feet to get more trajectory and things like that. So that's an interesting sort of side issue in terms of the distance that ancient arrows could fire. Generally, between about 250 and 500 meters is the modern idea of how far you could fire an arrow. Anyway, so that's not the point, but the point is that the type of fire of ancient arrows tends not to be emphasized as being volleys. And I think one of the issues is that the development of European volley fire from the 16th and 17th century onwards, and especially in late 18th and 19th century warfare, has really influenced the idea that this is how you fire weapons, missile weapons. Whereas in the ancient world, there's no evidence that slingers, well, I say no evidence, that's part of the rabbit hole. We'll get to that in a minute. There's very little evidence that this sort of volley fire existed. So, if we count the numbers, for instance, of the Persians at Thermopylae, there's, meant to be 5 million men. Now, 5 million men firing arrows just randomly is going to put a lot of arrows, which indeed would block out the sun. And it's hard for us to imagine how that wouldn't be somehow organized. It's a problem because if you're firing multiple arrows, if you fire 10 arrows a minute, for instance, that's one every 6 seconds. In unaimed archery fire, that's not actually particularly fast. 6 seconds is a very long time. I think there was a 21 Jump Street episode about what you could do in 6 seconds, I think, pretty sure. Early Johnny Depp, a very weird reference to make. Anyway, you could fire an arrow. And of course, one of the other things about the way that archery is shown in virtually all films and all televisions is that they pull the bow taut and keep it there. That's not how you fire a bow in any circumstance. You pull and release. And of course, that doesn't take very long. And so the idea that you would hold that as a big threat is a very movie myth aspect of ancient warfare, medieval warfare. So volley fire seems not to exist in the ancient sources. We've got some later ideas that, for instance, when Arion is facing the Alans in the 130s AD, he wants to drive them off using his auxiliary archers, and he talks about the ineffable amount of shots, the amount of arrows, not volleys of arrows. And similarly, when we get to Vegetius, so, we've gone from the Iliad all the way through to Vegetius. So we've just, randomly covered 1,500 years of history. What we find there is that the Romans, who are becoming more and more archers in the late 4th, early 5th century, are learning a lot from the Huns and learning a lot from the Goths and the Alans about archery. So doesn't really help us in terms of how are they firing these arrows? Are these volley fires? And it tends not to be. Similarly, when we think about peltasts or javelin armed troops or slingers, or indeed Roman legionaries later with their pila, we're not told anywhere about volley fire of those weapons. We're told about those weapons being thrown and, the effectiveness of that throwing. And it's almost an extrapolation that the modern mind can't avoid making, that has to be in volleys rather than just men throwing randomly. And there must have been some kind of organization, that the guy next to you is throwing or is going to interfere with you throwing, you should avoid him or somehow coordinate with the men around you when you're throwing your spears as opposed to they are. Or the other option, of course, which is another one of the debates today about the formations in ancient warfare, that they're much looser than we tend to see them and in our imaginations, that they're a much tighter formation in general, even when they're discharging missiles, and that they then get into an even closer order, such as the testudo, on occasion. So that's a problem as well, because we really don't know how that operates. Okay, so the basic answer, which has taken me 7 minutes to say, is no, there was no volley fire, seemingly, in ancient archery or other missile practices. Now, the rabbit hole that I've gone down in previous musings on such a things is that when the European countermarch is invented in the late 16th century, which is, apologies if I mispronounce this, William Lewis of Nassau-Dillenburg, he reads a ancient Greek tactica, which of course were the documents, the books written about how to marshal your troops in the fashion of a Hellenistic or Macedonian phalanx. Now he reads Aelian's tactica, which I love the fact that Aelian is pretty much dismissed by modern ancient historians as being, well, he's an academic, he's an armchair soldier, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Whereas in the late 16th century, 1594, William Lewis reads this and goes, aha, I've got an idea based on my reading of this supposed armchair historian. And he invents we've got the letter and we've got the diagram that he draws based on his reading. He invents the European countermarch based on his reading of an ancient tactica. Now, of course, the European countermarch is the invention of volley fire for cavalry initially, but also then after that, infantry. So fascinatingly there, the particular countermarch that he reads is what's called the Cretan countermarch. Now, why? So that there are three countermarches. There is the Persian countermarch, the Laconian countermarch, and the Cretan countermarch. The names of the countermarches are odd because they are. Why would there be a Persian one or a Cretan one? And there's another one. No, the Persian. No, anyway, the Cretan one is the one that inspires William Lewis. Now, what that is where the front person in a formation swaps places with the rear person in the formation. And so they countermarch back through the formation and take up position at the back. What that allowed a phalanx to do was to stay in the same place on the battlefield, but change faces. So you would essentially countermarch to the back and then the whole unit would turn. And that way you can face behind, whereas the other countermarches are either moving forward or moving sideways. But of course, your unit would take up the space to the side of where you currently are or to the front of where you currently are. Whereas the Cretan countermarch has the advantage that you stay in the same space. What William Lewis did was go, if we give these people a musket and they shoot and then countermarch to the back of the formation where they reload, and then the second rank shoots, third rank, so forth, you actually invent a continuous volley fire of musketry in his case. Now, fascinatingly, if you reverse engineer it, and this is where the speculation comes in. If you reverse engineer that and say, why is it the Cretan countermarch that inspires William Lewis? And he seems to be reading a lot into the text. But the only famous force of Cretans in ancient warfare are Cretan archers that become ubiquitous in Greek and Roman armies from the late 5th century BC onwards. We find Cretan archers in virtually all Greek armies from the end of the Peloponnesian War going forward. Alexander takes them into Persia. They're on the Anabasis retreat from Cunaxa. So they are everywhere in ancient Greek warfare, and they become famous as archers, mercenary archers in many, many armies. Why? So, speculation hat on, is the Cretan countermarch named after the Cretan archers who somehow have actually achieved this volley fire using this countermarch, an archer firing at the front, countermarching to the back. Now, obviously, archery doesn't require as long to reload, but your men will need to replenish their ammunition. So perhaps, therefore, the Cretan archer invented some kind of continuous fire from the archers. So, for instance, if the archers shot 20 arrows, their entire quiver, the size of quivers is a different issue entirely, the capacity, they fired theirs, then they countermarched to replenish their stocks. The second rank would do the same. You've actually invented a method whereby you have a continuous rate of fire, of continuous volleys, and that may have been one of the things that marked the Cretans out. Now, as I say, that's pure speculation, but I quite like it, and I do like to speculate. Perhaps a little bit too much. I've been told that many times, but that's okay. So, short answer to your question, Nathan, no. Long answer, maybe. And that's only taken me 13 minutes to say. You can, of course, ask a question. You can back us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/Ancient Warfare Podcast. There's 3 different levels at which you can back us. Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. If you pay the $1, you can support us. If you pay the $5, you can get a digital copy of the magazine per month, bi-monthly, or if you pay 10, you get a print copy of the magazine. Anyway, I hope to see you again soon for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray. Thanks. Bye.